Despite often rapid and substantial in-hospital improvement in heart failure signs and symptoms with standard therapy, still approximately a quarter of heart failure patients are rehospitalized within 30 days, and 30% of patients may die within 1 year. Clearly, there's some need for more therapy and some better therapy. We are here to discuss a novel therapeutic approach analyzed in the late-breaking clinical trial Socrates-Reduced. And to do that, I'm with Dr. Paul Armstrong, Distinguished University Professor at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. And let's start with the basics before we talk about the trial itself. Why are you looking at a new agent like this?
Well, despite the substantial improvements we've made, there are a need, as you pointed out, for both morbidity and mortality to improve. And so when a novel chemistry comes around, a different mechanism of action, the attraction is, can we add value to what we already have on top of current evidence-based medicines? And so that's why this discussion and this trial is interesting.
So this is a novel approach. Can you tell us a little about the science before we talk about it?
So soluble guanylate cyclase is deficient in heart failure, and this agent, Vericiguat, seems to stimulate and sensitize the heart as it relates to this. And this appears to be good for a potential number of reasons. One, that it may enhance performance. Two, that it may even allow the heart to relax more fully. And three, that it may in fact have antifibrotic or positive remodeling effects on structure and function, which we know are fundamentally important in heart failure.
So now let's talk about this new data coming from the Socrates-Reduced trial.
Right. So this was a phase 2 study of about 450 patients, and so naturally it was blinded, placebo-controlled, and the spectrum of dose between 2.5 and 10 milligrams was studied. The patients were those who had had worsening heart failure and were entered within 2 weeks of this, so that they were a high-risk population, because this is where the money is, if you will, in terms of events. And essentially there were 3 endpoints that were explored. One was natriuretic peptide, which, as you know, is a fairly reliable proxy of how heart failure patients are doing. And if you enter patients, as Socrates did, with high BNP and then track it, does it change? And in fact, it did change in the highest dose. The top 3 doses were the primary endpoint, and it almost made it on that primary, but it definitely did with a nice dose response on BNP. Second, there were structural changes as assessed by echocardiography, structural and function changes. And there appeared to be some improvement in ejection fraction, again in the highest dose. And third, which is a bonus in phase 2 that you don't really expect, is that there seemed to be some favorable effects on rehospitalization and clinical outcomes that, if it were validated subsequently, would be a great bonus.
Now, where to next?
Well, obviously, I think, and I should have prefaced my remarks by saying this was in patients with reduced ejection fraction heart failure.
Right, so Socrates-Reduced, yeah, obviously.
Exactly. And so obviously, I think there's enough here in terms of positive results and really no significant safety signal, which I should have underscored, that I think a phase 3 study is warranted. And obviously going from a few hundred to a few thousand patients to get at those meaningful clinical endpoints is the next phase here. The other thing that I should say is that there's a sister of Socrates-Reduced called Socrates-Preserved.
That's what I was going to ask.
And it's the patients with ejection fraction over 45%.
Right.
And it's in the cooker. It's in the incubator. And I think by the time the American College of Cardiology rolls around next April, there may be some results to share there. And possibly there's a 1-2 punch.
So are there other agents being studied with using this particular approach?
Well, obviously, LCZ, as we use Z in Canada as opposed to Z, but LCZ, which I think is now called Ernesto, is the latest player in the field, and it showed a benefit in patients with reduced, and there is another study with that agent looking at preserved that's enrolling patients now, so I think that is the other one to keep an eye on.
Well, we need something, obviously.
We sure do.
The data is to the point where we've got to help these patients as much as possible and reduce hospitalization, rehospitalization. And if you want to know, this is in JAMA, so please, you will get the citation for that as soon as I say, for CardioSource World News, I'm Executive Editor Rick McGuire.